Welcome to Higher PhD's Alternate Career Path Success Stories, ACPSS for short. ACPSS is a monthly series that aims to expose you, our audience, to the numerous career possibilities outside of academia. ACPSS is one of several initiatives specially designed for you, our audience, by Higher PhD, a non-profit organization that helps graduates with advanced degrees unlock their potentials by providing them with the resources required to make a success of their careers. And today we have a very special, much requested guest. We are so glad she accepted our invitation. And we have Ashley today to tell us about her career journey. I'm going to let Ashley tell us everything about herself, but just to give a bit of a background to who Ashley is. Ashley has a background in developmental psychology. That's what she also did her PhD in. And in May 2022, Ashley made a bold move, quitting her very prestigious postdoctoral fellowship to pursue a career in UX research. She has shared her story on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and very recently on Instagram. She's going to tell us everything about her transition, what her motivations and inspirations were, and we're going to learn from her career journey. You're welcome, Ashley.
Thank you for having me. So I think just brief, the short version is I did my bachelor's at Duke in psychology. I wanted to be a therapist for most of the time that I was going through undergrad. And I knew that I wanted to get a PhD. I thought I would be in child and adolescent psychology. And I knew that I needed research experience. And I ended up working in an infant language development lab of all places. I took a developmental psych course, was really interested in language development. And then as I was in this lab, I realized how much I liked research. And by the end of undergrad, I decided that I actually wanted to get my PhD in developmental psychology and to become a researcher. And at that point, everyone told me that I should be a professor. That was kind of the career option that was presented to me. So I went and did my PhD at the University of Washington in Seattle. And throughout all of my PhD, I was like, I'm going to be a faculty member at a top tier research university. And that was my one and only career goal until probably my fourth year when I served on a faculty search committee. And I actually saw the process from the other side. And we were whittling down 120 applicants for one faculty position, and just seeing the decisions that were made and just having people with CVs that were much better than mine getting cut out and not getting interviews. I just remember sitting there as a fourth year grad student thinking I'm never going to get a faculty job. This is never going to happen to me. And at that point, I was also really starting to fall in love with Seattle. Slowly I started to fall in love with the city over the course of 4 years, and all my friends were here. And so I started at that point actually putting out feelers. And at that point, UX research was a really popular career path. This was 2018. And that was the only other career path I knew that psych PhDs did. But my whole research program was on infant emotional development and emotion perception. So very, very different than working in tech. Wasn't quite convinced that's what I wanted to do. So I applied to one postdoctoral fellowship, which was an NIH T32, and telling myself, if I got it, I'd keep riding the academic train for a little while longer. And then I got it, and then ended up moving to Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, at the end of 2019. Not a great time to move. 6 months into my postdoc, COVID shut down my university. And then fast forward, and all of a sudden I was a third year postdoc. I didn't have a faculty job. I was am I going to do a fourth or fifth year of a postdoc? And at that point, for a variety of reasons, I was I can't do that. I just turned 30. I'm I can't do this anymore. So yeah, January 2022, I'm okay, we're done. We're going to do something new. Applied to a bunch of different jobs. Wasn't necessarily sold on UX specifically, but it was the first job offer I had at a consulting company called Bold Insight. And then I started that job in May, about a year ago, May. I worked there for about 3 months. And then I really, really wanted to move back to Seattle and ended up on a whim applying to a contract role at Meta. And I got that job, and that's where I am now. So I work in reality labs in the R&D department. So I work on developing new augmented reality and virtual reality technology that's still probably about 5 to 10 years out from being a consumer product, but the work I do is pretty varied. And yeah, happy to talk about that more, but that's kind of where I ended up, and have lots of other thoughts about like the weirdness of tech layoffs and the tech industry and UX specifically, but definitely happy in like a non-academic research career. Not sure if UX will be my career path for like forever, but definitely non-academic research is for sure where I'll end up being for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's really very inspiring hearing, your transition. Sometimes when we talk about this transition out of academia, a lot of people think that you have to be, those people who make the move are those maybe who are frustrated because they don't have publications and things like that. But looking at your publication history, and sorry, I've seen your resume as well, because you've shared that on LinkedIn. Looking at your accomplishments while you're in academia, I could say you were accomplished, right? So I just want our audience to appreciate the fact that your decision to transition out of academia, you should not feel like you are a failure or you're not accomplished when you move out of academia. And I'm just going to let Ashley talk more.
Yeah.
We're really interested to know, like, pivoting, because like you mentioned, there's really not enough of education about career options outside of academia while you are in academia, right? So it's like there are two extremes. You're in academia, you don't get to know much about what goes on outside, right? So I just want you to be able to speak to our audience, right? So those people who are like at a point where they are considering, I want to come out of academia, like what will you, in your opinion, what helped you to decide that, okay, you know what, this is time for me to move? And even though you were not really very, like you mentioned, not very clear about all the options out there, but you just found something that you felt comfortable enough with to say, okay, let me start out here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the messaging I got all through grad school was like, if you leave academia, you're like a failure in some way, or you couldn't handle the pressure. And like, that was the messaging. And I personally didn't know anyone who like had kind of made a deliberate choice that like, no, this like isn't for me, and made it without any shame attached to it. So it was always this like very shameful thing, and people felt really badly about it. But then when I decided to leave, it was for a variety of different reasons. Like one of the big reasons is I just like, I wanted to move on with my life. Like I wanted to choose where I lived. I wanted to, it wasn't clear, like even if I did a 4th or 5th year of a postdoc, that I was even going to get a faculty job in a place that I wanted to live. And I mean, like you said, I have like 15 first author publications. I won 2 dissertation awards. I had a prestigious postdoc fellowship. Like by every metric, I was doing all the things. I had famous advisors, like all of the things. And there's still no guarantee at the end of the day that I was going to get a faculty job in a place that I wanted to live. It was never going to pay as much as a non-academic research job. And then it was just like, I have like an anxiety disorder. And as I progressed further and further along in my academic career, it was getting worse and worse. And I just didn't see how it would end. Like, if I got a faculty job, then I'd be grinding for 5 years to get tenure. And like, is this ever going to end? Am I ever going to have like free time? Am I ever going to just be able to feel calm and not work all of the time? And I mean, yeah, it's a high stress career. It doesn't pay well, and you just have to do a lot of work all the time. And all of these are like very valid reasons that I decided to transition out of academia. When I started my postdoc, I had 3 years of funding, and I told myself like 3 years and that's it. And so then I got to the end of the 3 years, and I didn't expect a global pandemic. So I was actually applying for another NIH grant. I had just submitted a revision for a K-99 in which I had poured like 70 hours of work into. So I just up and walked away from all of it. But yeah, there is like this idea that you're a failure in some way, but at the end of the day, like the jobs there aren't enough jobs. Like when I went on the job market once, and I was told that I was shortlisted for a job that I really wanted, and they said that 400 people had applied. And so I made the short list of like 20 or 30, but at that point you could pick anyone from this list and they would be amazing because everyone's well qualified. So there's just, the jobs don't exist, and that's just the reality of the situation. But yeah, I don't think I'm a failure. Like I did everything that I could, and like now I'm doing something new. And yeah, I think it's easy to imagine that there's like, I don't know, I spent like 10 years in this career and I didn't know anything else until I decided to leave and did something else. But yeah, a lot of shame and like fear attached to all of these things for sure.
Yeah. So can you tell us about the UX research?
Yeah. So when I was applying, I knew that I really liked research. And that was also one of the reasons I didn't really want to stay in academia, because I didn't actually like teaching that much, or at least I didn't like curriculum development. I think like in some ways I'm teaching right now, like I'm doing some knowledge transfer and like that feels fun to me, but I didn't like grading papers or like giving lectures or anything like that. So I knew that I wanted a research career. So I applied to like a bunch of different positions. So UX research, behavioral science, just like research scientist positions at various companies and nonprofits. And ultimately I took the first job offer I had, which was for a UX research position. And it was a true entry-level position. So I got pretty lucky. And these don't really exist, or they do exist, but there are not that many of them. And now the market is like super saturated because of all the tech layoffs. But UX essentially, it's a field that's been around since the early 90s, and it's basically doing social science research on consumer products. So like I said, I work in reality labs. So a lot of the work I do is on augmented reality glasses, which is something that a lot of companies are working on right now. So I work with different teams in reality labs. So maybe the audio team, the graphics team, the optics and displays team, and they bring me the different pieces of technology that they're working on now. And I actually take this and I test it with people to make sure that if we're building this product, it's actually something that people want and something that's it's easy to use, and any features that we are adding are also going to be easy to use and something that people want. So anyone who has like a social sciences background, so psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, and research experience, that is like the background for UX research. But at the end of the day, like UX is its own kind of like unique field that is different than psychology. So some principles apply, but the methods are a little bit different. But my job looks pretty similar to what I was doing as a postdoc, or kind of like a later stage grad student, where I'm managing a bunch of research projects at the same time from start to finish, working with other designers and engineers to actually design the research projects, run them, analyze the results, and then report back to them. So end-to-end research experience, and then also having public speaking skills and writing skills are also, these are like the marketable skills that you would need to be a UX researcher.
Well, that's really very exciting, right? So knowing that all the skills that you acquired in academia is really very useful, even though it is not exactly what you studied, you're able to translate a lot of them. You mentioned collaboration with different teams. You mentioned research skill, which is really very pivotal. You mentioned as well your ability to write and speak, communicate effectively. So these are all skills that, a lot of graduate students get in course of their training. And for you, our audience, these are skills that you might already have. So you just have to find ways to tailor these your experiences towards roles. And she mentioned getting an entry-level role. So that is a very good starting point. You can learn from her example, looking out for roles that are entry-level, that, like she mentioned, is they're also rare. So I'll give Ashley a chance to tell us how, based on her experience now in the field, now she's a professional in the field. So she will tell us, like, for someone, like, for example, me, right? I don't have any experience in user research. Where do I start? Like, because that's another thing a lot of our people worry about. I'm just coming from academia. I don't have any industry experience. I don't know how life is in the industry. Where do I start from?
Yeah, so and I will like reiterate again that it's just kind of a weird time. Like it was already hard to like go from academia to UX, and it's even harder now because of all the tech layoffs, and even like Meta, like my company, they just laid off 10,000 people. They had laid off another 11,000 people in November, and there's widespread hiring freeze. So it is hard to break into this field. And I think a lot of people do it because like the jobs are high paying, which is not like, it's not a good reason to like go into this field. But there are ways, like I taught myself like almost everything that I know about UX. And that's also what I tell PhDs, is that you're exceptional learners. Like you're really good at learning things really quickly, and you can teach yourself everything. So it depends on how you like learning. So I really like books and podcasts. So there's a lot of really good books about UX research. Darren Hood is someone whose content I really like, and he has a podcast and a blog. And on the blog, he has book recommendations, and I've read a lot of them. And so there's definitely ways that you can teach yourself about UX. I'm currently a contractor at Meta, so the contract positions are easier to get than full-time positions. And they are the ones that I think this is why I was not impacted by the layoffs, because they had impacted mostly full-time employees.
So that's a sweet spot.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's been, again, super, like a super weird time to like transition into like a big tech company. But yeah, so contract roles are easier. You can also do volunteer projects to get some UX experience to like put in a portfolio. But yeah, that is like the big barrier is like, how do you acquire UX experience if you can't find an entry level position? And yeah, some of it is like teaching yourself and volunteering. Boot camps are like a little bit hit and miss. I would also, again, just check out Darren Hood. On his blog, he has like recommend the educational resources he recommends. And if like UX is something that you wanted to go into, like there are some certificates that he would recommend, and there are others like the Google Design Certificate, for example, that is not going to get you a UX job. Like maybe you'll learn something, but like that is not sufficient to actually like get you into the field. So I'd be wary about dumping like a bunch of money onto boot camps. It's not something that I did at all, but at this point, I would also just recommend like checking out other kinds of research positions that aren't just UX, just given like the weirdness in the UX market. But if you're a grad student, doing an internship program is what I would typically recommend. So those are becoming more competitive as well, but that is like the number one thing that you can do to actually get experience. And I also have a few friends who are currently in PhD programs who actually got like a contract position and ended up, maybe taking a year to like work this contract position, or like we're finishing up their dissertation like while they were doing the contract position. So there are ways that you can get experience in UX, but yeah, it was hard to break in before, and it's like probably going to be like pretty hard to break in now for sure.
But that reminds me, that just takes me a bit of tangent, but in the rise of AI technology, right? AI tools that are doing amazing things these days. What in your opinion, what do you think is the future of UX research? Do you think these tools in any way impacts the future possibilities of people, who want to pursue this as a career?
Yeah, potentially. Maybe not anytime soon, but I mean, yeah, I think that's like the big question with like all careers, right? Is like, how much is AI going to take over any career, for example? And like I have several friends in the arts, for example, and like this is something I talk about with them a lot. It's like when you have like AI being able to just generate art, like what determines like what is real art and what is the computer generated art, and same thing with like AI being able to write like academic papers and things like that. So I think in some ways a lot of career fields are going to be impacted. I don't know if it's like UX specifically, but in terms of like, I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm still doing research with people, and so you still need like a person, at least for now, until we have like robots who can actually like do this for us. You still need to collect research with people and like interact with people, and so that does require like some one-on-one interaction. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a good question for sure.
Yeah, so in terms of your day-to-day role and like on your role, right? Your day-to-day activities on the role as a UX researcher, because many of our audience, they want to be like you, right? So they want to have an idea of what is a typical day for you like as a UX researcher? Just to give it a bit of a context, right? So what do you find more fulfilling in terms of your day-to-day activities as a UX researcher? What do you find frustrating as well? Are there times where you miss, like, okay, I wish I was doing something different, or like how does it pan out for you?
Yeah, I think my answer to this question has definitely changed over the past year. And like I said, I joined Meta in September of last year. So like a month after I joined was like the first wave of layoffs, and then we just had another wave of layoffs. So it's been a very strange time. So I think the thing that I dislike the most is that things have just been in constant flux since I've been here. And like one of my one of my managers was laid off in the first round of layoffs, and then in this round of layoffs, like our team lead is no longer a manager. So it's this been like this constant flux, and I've had to kind of adapt to all of these things, and maybe haven't necessarily gotten like the full experience that I thought I would get like working at Meta. And I still have time on my contract, and hopefully it'll be renewed, and then maybe I'll have another year where things feel like more normal for me. So that's been hard, and something that I had to, when this one person on my team was impacted by the first round of layoffs, I was basically told like, you need to finish his projects. Like you just joined, and like here are his projects and you need to finish them. And I was like, okay, I just joined a month ago, but like I'm pretty competent. Like I'll figure this out. And I did, and it was fine. But that was really stressful. Like it was super stressful. And I think like with UX, you kind of are just having to roll with the punches a lot. And especially with all of this restructuring, like some projects are getting dropped, other things are getting deprioritized or like moved up in the priority list. And so things are just constantly in flux. And so you just have to kind of roll with things. Whereas I feel like with academic research, the pace is much slower, and maybe you have like, I mean, as a postdoc, I don't know that I necessarily had like complete control over my work. I was still, working with faculty, but I had more control over things in terms of like the direction of things. So that's been like a little difficult, but it's just like it's just a challenge. I wouldn't say that's necessarily like bad. But I do prefer the pace of UX to academic research in a lot of ways, because so I did developmental psychology research. I worked with babies. Babies are really, really hard to test, and those data collection takes years sometimes. And then after that, especially peer review now, that can take years. And so start to finish, like a project could be from like, I have this idea to the paper is actually accepted and is going to be published 3 years, 5 years, like more than
Wow,
that in
that's a
some
long time.
cases.
Yeah.
Like, and here it's not that, like it's not going to take that long. Like it's going to take a quarter or maybe like 3 to 6 months to do a project. And then we're analyzing the data, you're presenting it in a PowerPoint presentation, and that's it. Like you don't have to publish it, you don't have to get P's less than 0.05, you're not going through rounds of like grueling peer review or anything like that. And so I feel like that, like the pace of that feels a lot nicer to me, because by the time I'm like on the third round of revisions for a research paper, I'm just like, I never want to look at this ever again. Like I'm so sick of this. Like, and it doesn't, and that's the thing, like, unless you get the paper published, it's like, it doesn't even matter in academia.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that matters.
Mhm.
And so the incentive structures, I really prefer them outside of academia. And this is coming from someone who wrote, like I said, 15 first author papers and multiple grants. Like I
Yeah.
clearly liked writing and did it a lot, but it was still, it's hard for me to even go back and read my papers. Honestly. Like they're just so dense and so long. And like, give me a slide deck. Like I'll just put in like the main points and like send it off, and like, it'll be good.
Yeah. Well, it seems very interesting then. Okay, so do you think that there are particular personality types that are well suited for this role of a UX researcher, or do you think anybody can just be adaptable and just take up the position?
I mean, I think it's funny because like Darren Hood talks about this a lot, so I feel like I'm just gonna parrot like what he says. But I mean, like anyone could learn this field. Yes, that's true. I think there is some level of like, there's like emotional intelligence or empathy that like makes someone a better UX researcher, because you hear the word empathy thrown around a lot. And like, I'm a psychologist, like I don't necessarily like how this word is used in UX, but you are trying to, in some ways, like get inside the head of your user, your consumer, and figure out what they might want or need, and trying to like empathize with them as much as possible. So if you're I think there are definitely like some types of people who would maybe not be as well suited for like this particular role, and maybe are people who would, maybe enjoy like doing more like a computer like programming or like data science role, or like a data analytics role or something like that. But I think having this like people facing job, there is like some degree of, like social interaction and empathy and emotional intelligence that I think is required to like really succeed in UX. And and also just like communication skills, because a big thing that I'm doing is I'm taking my findings and I'm presenting them back to designers and engineers who aren't necessarily versed, who don't have like a PhD in psychology, who aren't like as well versed in these research methods or even in statistics as I am, and being able to basically have to convince people. So it's some out of sales and persuasion, convincing people to follow my recommendations in terms of where I think the products and the features should go in the future. Like these are all skills that I think I don't think like preclude you from being a UX researcher, but it would definitely make it more likely that you would succeed in this field for sure.
Yeah, really very helpful then. Talking about success in the field, what do you, in your opinion, are the opportunities for growth? Because, when people are leaving academia, in academia is really structured, okay, after you get a postdoc, you land a faculty position, and then you grow to become a professor, and that is kind of like the cap, right? So in UX research, are there levels of progression like that? Like,
yeah,
what are opportunities for growth?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess like at Meta, there are different levels. So like I'm at a level 4, but I think the levels go all the way up to 9 for what's called like an individual contributor. So there's just someone like me who's like an individual researcher. And then there's also like a manager track, and the manager levels go up as well. So those are kind of like the two roles that you fall into in UX. So you can either be like, I'm this like independent scientist and I'm going to continue to be like an individual contributor. Or if you really like more of the management side of things and you want to have a team and things like that, then you would go on the manager track. And so I think for me, if I end up staying in UX in the long term, I think I would be interested in managing a team. But kind of given like this, I think before, like people who were like fairly young, and I would consider myself to be like fairly young in my career, they were getting promoted to being managers with just a few years of experience of like in being in UX. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen anymore. And it might be the case that, maybe I'm going to have to be in this field for like 5 to 10 years to actually like be managing a team. But, again, I'm going to be 32 in a couple of weeks. So I'm still pretty young, all things considered. And so, yeah, but I think like, I thought about running my own lab for 10 years. Like I had all these ideas about like how I would run my lab and things like that. So I think being a manager seems like it would be a fun thing for me to do, but a lot could happen in 5 to 10 years. Like maybe I'm also pouring like more time into creating content on social media. So like, who knows where that's going to be in 5 to 10 years? Like maybe I'll be doing that full time. Who knows?
You're already an influencer.
I know, but the key is like, how do you make money off of doing that? Like that's the real thing. And that's not something that I've only recently like toyed around the idea of like, maybe I could do that to at least like have like additional income. I am paid to do talks, which is something I never thought I would be like doing ever. So yeah, who knows? Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's exciting. It's like, I've also toyed around the idea of like, my PhD is in developmental psych, like maybe I want to go back and like doing research with kids, or like doing research with like kids in UX or something like that. And so there's like all these different possibilities for things. And I don't feel like I'm not pigeonholed into like, I'm going to be like a professor and I'm going to stay at this one university until I die, basically. There's so many other things that I could do. And like, who knows? Like, who knows where I'm going to be in 5 years?
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering though, the manager track progression you mentioned, are there special requirements for one to be on that track, or is it the same, just your years of experience, but like basically it just depends on where you find yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely like some personalities who are probably better suited to being on the manager track. And I think there at Meta is like some additional training that you go through to like be on that track specifically. But I don't think there's like special requirements necessarily.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that's definitely, yeah, I think at some point, like people choose whether to go the manager route or not. And some people like maybe are a manager for a while and then decide they like don't want to lead a team anymore and have like bounced back and forth. So like I know people who have like gone manager route, have stayed there, have gone back and forth. And yeah, so I mean it's kind of up to you, I think, and like what feels good. But I mean I could see it going either way for me, because I also really like doing end-to-end research as well. But I
Mhm.
could also see myself managing a team, and that could be fun.
Okay. So, yeah, do you have any general advice for our audience, people looking to land interviews? Like, how can they put their best foot forward and uniquely position themselves for success in their job search or in their careers?
I think in terms of like standing, I don't think there's necessarily like standing out. I think you're just qualified or you're not qualified for particular jobs. But I would definitely like work on making like a really solid resume and tailoring it for whatever job you want. To just focus on one job title. So if you're going to apply to UX, like UX is a very, very specific field, and you really need to market yourself as a UX researcher. And that's different than if you're going into like behavioral science or research science or something like that. So just making sure that you understand like what career you're trying to get, the skills that that career is looking for, how resumes look. And to do all of this, I'd absolutely recommend like getting on LinkedIn, making a profile, start connecting with people, start chatting with people, and like really doing this networking, because the networking is really what's going to help you land a job, because a lot of jobs aren't necessarily publicly advertised. And you just really want to make these connections to where if a job does come up, people will think of you and they're like, oh yeah, like Ashley seems like she'd be really well qualified for this job. Like I'll hit her up and see if she's interested. So I mean, like at this point, like my LinkedIn profile and is like big enough to where I have recruiters like messaging me pretty often, mostly for like contract positions in Seattle. But yeah, they're just messaging me and being like, hey, I have a role. Like, are you interested in this, for example? So definitely like getting on LinkedIn and starting to engage and stuff. And I feel like academics are, and I was very averse to LinkedIn as an academic, but it's definitely where a lot of the jobs are. And if you're looking for a non-academic job, particularly in tech, is kind of where you have to be and where you have to be like more active for sure. So those are my big pieces of advice. If you're just sending out a CV kind of like to every job ad, it's not going to be an effective job at all. So yeah, you really want to make sure that you're networking and have like a very like well-tailored resume for whatever career path that you're focusing on. And if you have no idea where to start, I started by just connecting with alumni in my program. So other psych PhDs who had transitioned into various industry positions. And then they were usually able to connect me with other people. But then I also just like messaged random people on LinkedIn who had PhDs in developmental psych. I was like, hey, like, what are you doing? What are you up to? Like, people are sometimes more or less available to talk about their specific jobs. I used to do one-on-one meetings with people, but I can't anymore because too many people want to meet with me. So I do things like this where I can actually like talk to multiple people at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the links you mentioned and all the advice you shared. So for the links, we're going to get the links from her and put them in the description. And also you'll see some of the links fly across your screen. All right. So yeah, so lots of great advice for Ashley. But Ashley, could you just also talk to employers, right? Because I know some of them are in our audience and they'll be listening. So many times when people have PhDs, there's that kind of it's like you miss out on both ends, right? Because in academia, the competition is stiff, and then you come out there, and there's this tendency for people to think that you are overqualified for lots of positions. So can you put a word out there to um, employers, right? To why should anyone care about people with advanced degrees, PhDs, and all?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I hear this a lot, but like it's funny because I like never received any of that like during my interviews. Like no one ever was like, oh, you're overqualified for anything like that. But it is something I hear a lot. And I think, yeah, there's definitely like a disconnect where like PhDs don't understand like how to market their skills to where employers like understand like what
Mhm.
skills they have. And I think it's because PhDs tend to focus too much on like what they've studied instead of the skills that they have. So if I were going out in the world being like, well, I studied infant emotion perception and here's all of my findings and stuff, like Meta doesn't care. Like Meta doesn't care that I studied babies. Like they care that I understand stats and I understand like how to communicate, and I understand how to write, and I understand different research methods. But in terms of like the content of what I'm studying, like they don't really care at all. So I think like that's the big disconnect. And then yeah, and I guess I have run into like a little bit of this with employers. Like sometimes employers don't understand like I think like I got into a little trouble with my first job because I asked a lot of questions. I think maybe that came off kind of like I was questioning things, but I was just like intensely curious. It's just how my brain works. And I was just asking a lot of questions about things. So I think there are some companies that understand more or less how to deal with PhDs. At Meta, there's a bunch of PhDs, and so that's not really an issue. But at smaller companies who maybe like have never had a PhD or have had like very few PhDs, there's definitely some like I think that's maybe where like the overqualified stuff gets in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely see it on like both ends for sure. But yeah, I mean PhDs are we've been like very like intensely trained in like research methods. I mean, at least like in my for like psychology, like I have 12 years of research experience, like from undergrad and grad school. And so that's all I've been able to transition into this field like pretty easily, I think. Um, like shocking, like I was surprised at how easy all of this felt for me. And at my first job, I was working with a bunch of people who just had like bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. And it was pretty clear that like the research experience I had was like far more intensive than, you know, what a bachelor's or a master's student had. And I also had 3 years of a postdoc, which that's even more like excessive. I would not, I guess I will plug, I will not recommend that anyone do a postdoc at all. Especially if you have like any doubt about like transitioning out of academia, like do not do a postdoc. It will not help you at all. It doesn't like count towards like industry experience in any way. It's just, and someone told me this when I was a grad student and I didn't listen to them, but it places you in a different applicant pool than if you were a grad student just applying to a non-academic job. So yeah, I think you can definitely find companies that are like more or less understanding of like what a PhD is. But if you are applying to these companies that maybe don't have any experience working with PhDs, you're going to have to do a lot more legwork to just like, I wouldn't like leave your degree off your resume. I've heard some people doing that, and that's just, I don't understand that. But I think you just need to really like tailor your experience and talk about your experience in a way that makes sense to employers.
That's a very good answer to that question. So if you're in the audience and you are having doubts about, oh, do I drop my PhD? Actually, I'm giving you a solution right there. So be mindful, be very conscious about where you send your applications to, and also you have to perfect the act of showcasing your value, knowing you're valuable first of all, and presenting your value when you have to do so to employers, and also for employers to know that PhDs are very valuable. They have lots of skills, and if you have one in your organization, then you'll be amazed by how much of capacity to do research to deliver results that they would bring to your teams. So yeah, Ashley has shared so much of wisdom. Like I've been just taking in all the advice she shared, her experience, her journey has been, really inspiring, really amazing. I'm sure she already knows, because just by sharing her story, she has amassed a huge following on Twitter and LinkedIn. So many people have been inspired by her story. And I hope that her sharing this story would also inspire you to take action and feel that irrespective of your background, once you have enough interest, like she mentioned, she self-taught herself all the UX principles that she is working with now in her job. It Meta, and Meta, I'm sure you know Meta, right? it's one of the big companies out there. So that tells you, like, if she could from no experience to Meta, then I mean, do I need to say anything more? So yeah, so I'm just going to let Ashley, like, just give us kind of takeaway messages, right? Or kind of like just general recommendations. Let her just, give us something that, we'll just hold on to. And, even if you take nothing out of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's going to tell you what to take away.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I stayed in academic research for a really long time. And I think for people I think a lot of people like me, I like wrapped up my entire identity in like being an academic. And it was really hard for me to imagine that there's anything else other to life other than like being in academia. And I think like over the past year, I've gone through like a lot of like different identity like transitions and like giving up my identity as an academic and trying to figure out like, okay, what do I like what am I doing now? And that's ultimately the thing that like surprised me the most that I went through, and the thing that was probably like harder for me than making any kind of like career transition was just adjusting to like my job is not my entire life anymore. Like my self-worth is not wrapped up in my job anymore. And I close my computer at the end of the day and I'm not thinking about like, oh my God, I have all this work. I have a never ending to-do list of things. I'll never finish it all. Like I'm not good enough. And like, I mean, I struggled with like really intense imposter syndrome, even with like all of my successes. I still never felt like it was enough. And yeah, I just don't feel that way anymore at all. And that really surprised me that like, I don't know, people who I work with are just like, I get a lot of like praise and compliments for the work that I do, and in a way that I just really didn't get in academia at all. And I think if you would have told me a year ago that I'd be like living in Seattle and working at Meta and having like a bunch of followers on social media and like and that I would be like really calm about it all, I'd be like, okay, sure. So yeah, and I don't know, I have rarely met anyone who like regrets leaving academia for something else. Like very rare for me to meet anyone who like regrets making this career choice. If anything, like I wish I would have done it sooner. Other people wish they would have done it sooner. So that's just like, I don't know. I think like the thing I wish I could tell myself a year ago is like, you're gonna be fine. Like in a year, you'll be fine. Like you'll be happy. Like because yeah, you can't see it when you're in it, but like once you're out of it, then I don't know. I wish I would have left sooner is like the nugget of advice that like I would give to people.
Just one quick fun question, right? So, like, it's still in line with wishing you would have left sooner. Will you have, if you had the opportunity to do things all over again, will you still have done a PhD?
That's a good question. For me, yes, but I had a really good advisor. I know I've had friends who did not have good advisors, who had really terrible PhD experiences. But I think for me, like at least in psychology, like if I wanted to do any kind of like research career, I would at least have needed to get I always wanted a PhD, which is going to sound weird. Like ever since I was really little, I just like deeply loved school. And I was like, I want the best like degree, the highest degree I can have. So I was always going to go to like med school or like get a PhD or something, like even from when I was like in elementary school, I like always wanted like a really advanced degree. And I had fun like tinkering around with like babies and all these ideas for 5 years. And I mean, it was definitely hard, like living in Seattle on my, whatever our $25,000 a year stipend. And I had to work like multiple jobs because that's like not enough money to live off of in Seattle. And so, yeah, there are aspects of that were like not ideal, but no, I think like I had a good time. I wouldn't do a postdoc again. Like I wish I would have just like transitioned out of academia in 2019 when I was because I had contract offers at Microsoft and Google that I said no to, basically.
Wow, that's good. Was it still in UX or was something else?
UX contract offers. And at that point I was like, I don't even know what this is. And like for Google or Microsoft to be just like essentially throwing offers at like people who have no experience and have like no idea what the field is. Again, this is like UX in like 2019. It's very different now, but yeah, no, I would have still done a PhD, but do I recommend that most people do a PhD? No, definitely not. But it depends on what career you want. Like most PhDs like aren't going to, like, you can, if you wanted to go into UX research right now, I would recommend doing a master's in human-centered design or human factors. Like that's what I would recommend you do. I wouldn't recommend you do a PhD because you get, it's a two-year degree, and then you actually like have job prep. Whereas I feel like unfortunately most PhDs aren't preparing you for a job outside of academia, and that's just probably not the job you're going to get. So I don't know. It's a super personal decision. I wouldn't take out loans to do a PhD, and it's also gonna like probably really like do a number on your mental health. It did for me. I was in therapy for like 4 out of my 5 years of my PhD program because I had to be. So yeah, these are all just like things to consider. But if you already have the PhD, now you got to figure out what to do with it. You can't go back in time. Like you got it. Now you got to roll with it. But
yeah, because there are people in our audience who are master students and are looking to do PhDs. So like I think a very fine balance based on what you've said is if you decide that, oh, like Ashley, I love research, I want to get to the peak of knowledge in my area and stuff like that, then you also desire to transition out of academia to do a non-academic career, then you should be, while you're doing your PhD, you should be looking, like she had mentioned, opportunities to volunteer. You should be listening to all these podcasts and reading the books so they really are done.
And I think also like making sure that whoever your advisor is actually like okay with you pursuing a non-academic career. Because I've talked to PhD students where they're like, I want to do an internship, but like my advisor won't let me. So that's also something so some departments are like more or less hostile to non-academic careers. So it's definitely something to consider. Like I wish, like I'm a first-gen college student, like my parents didn't go to college. I just assumed that if I got a PhD, like I would be fine, like career-wise. I wouldn't need to, or like any college degree, like it didn't matter what subject, I would be completely fine. Cause like that was maybe like the lie that most millennials had been told. But yeah, I think what I would do is I would think about like, what career do you want, and start from there, and then figure out like what education and training do you need to get that particular career. Like, do you need a PhD? Probably not. What do you need instead? And so I think that is like the place that I would operate from, rather than like, I'm just going to get this degree and things will be fine, because it's just not the reality of the situation. So work backwards from that instead.
Right. So a lot of advice, it's just left for you to just take this advice, implement it, and see how different your career will pan out. So thank you very much, Ashley, for your time, for sharing so freely with our audience. I'm sure that, those of you who have listened intently, in fact, just in case you missed any important points, you can watch this over and over again. It's going to be here on YouTube. This has been very insightful. Thank you for all the insights that you have shared, Ashley. And for those of you who are interested in UX research, the resources that I have already mentioned will be in the description, so that you can check it out. I hope this talk has inspired you as much as it inspired me. And perhaps you're wondering, oh, UX is not my thing, I have other interests. You can come back again next month when we have another guest who will share their career story with us. Until then, see you.